at least 7 million people with dementia. And that we're expecting by 2060 that number to double. New cases of dementia to double by 2060.
Really?
So that's really sobering. It's not uncommon to feel embarrassed, like we've done something wrong to get dementia. And we don't want people to feel that way, but it is a taboo. Research shows that caregivers die first. And I went, whoa. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. It's not just about taking care of yourself as a caregiver so that you can care for your loved one. It's that you yourself are worth taking care of just because you are you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Broken Beautiful Me. It's a sacred space where we gather for honest conversations and soul deep healing. I'm Kelly Buckley, your host, and each story we share and honor is a gentle reminder that even in our brokenness, we are beautifully becoming through hope, gratitude, and the quiet strength of resilience. Today, we are so fortunate to have as a guest Beverly Thorn. Beverly is a PhD and is the author of hundreds of articles, 2 books, and 4 workbooks on coping with chronic illness. She spent decades as a faculty member at Ohio State University and the University of Alabama, where she went on to serve as director of the PhD program and department chair in clinical psychology. Currently, Professor Emerita, she is a certified end-of-life doula and continues to publish, speak, and conduct workshops nationally and internationally on managing chronic illness. And her book, Before I Lose My Own Mind, Navigating Life as a Dementia Caregiver, is something that I'm really looking forward to chatting with her about today. Beverly, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, to start off, for our audience members who may not know a lot about your work and your background, can you kind of explain to us how you blended that training as a psychologist and the science of the brain with your calling as an end-of-life doula to write this book for caregivers?
Sure. Well, I never intended to be an end-of-life caregiver, and I never intended to be a dementia caregiver. So my area of research and clinical expertise as a clinical psychologist with a background in the neurosciences also was to help people cope with chronic illness. And in this case, in my whole career, it was chronic pain mostly, chronic pain-related disorders of all types, to help them cope with that and to help them be resilient, as you said. And in 2013, 2014, my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He didn't yet have the cluster of symptoms that we think of as dementia, but he had mild cognitive impairment at that point. And a test of the cerebrospinal fluid verified that he had Alzheimer's disease. In 2016, I retired in order to take care of him because he was needing help with his daily living activities. And I'm so glad I did because we had 2 really good years of travel, and I called it our hedonism journey. At that point, we just did what we wanted to and traveled, and he was an avid biker, cyclist, and we were able to do some international trips and some other trips, and it was just great. Now in 2018, it stopped being great, and he really went into the later phase of dementia, and he died in 2020.
Okay.
It wasn't until after he died that I actually saw an article in the New York Times about end-of-life doulas, and I didn't know anything about them, but it mentioned in the article that there were training programs, and I thought, I'm going to look into this because maybe it'll help me with my grief and my recovery. And I did. I signed up for it was an online but live end-of-life doula program, a pretty intensive 8-week training program. And I learned a lot there. And as I was doing all this, I was also posting on Facebook, closed dementia support group, Facebook caregiver support groups, and sharing what I was learning. And people were saying, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. I had been journaling this whole time because that's one thing psychologists help you do in order to cope better with challenges. And I had been journaling and I thought, oh gosh, do I have a book in me? I don't know. But I started writing it. And this is very different from the books I have written in the past. The books I've written in the past are for professionals. They're clinically oriented, but they're for professionals. This is for the lay public. And it was for me too.
Yes. It must have been kind of a labor of love and healing in some ways for you to kind of write this book for the lay person, having just experienced what you did.
Mm-hmm. I didn't really realize until I was developing the book that I thought at first it was just going to be all memoir, and I was just going to bare my soul and try to normalize these universal feelings that I certainly believe caregivers have. And I didn't realize, wait a minute, you have an expertise that other people don't have, and you can add that in. So in every chapter, what I have is a real life, bare my soul sort of memoir piece. But then I have facts and insights from a psychology standpoint and from what I learned. And then I have electronic resources that are available to anybody if they want to dive further into the topic. I did find, and I got this advice, and I thought it was great advice, that people who are in the throes of dementia caregiving and probably other caregiving, they're not going to have a lot of time to read long, involved chapters. So the chapters are short, but there's plenty of resources to go further when you want to.
And I love the idea of sharing the electronic resources as well, because sometimes, if a person is sitting up and they have their phone, they can go to one of those resources and just quickly, because you don't have a lot of time when you are a caregiver.
Right.
And so you have to kind of manage that time very carefully. So I'm sure that they appreciate the different options of formats for them to learn.
Yes, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback about that as well. One of the things that I did early on, since I have a print copy of the book, also have an e-copy of the book, and an audio book is coming October 28th. But I put all of the resources on my website by parts of the book. There are 3 parts to the book. And all of those resources are updated on a monthly basis. So as you know, websites can sometimes, the link can break and all of that hoo-ha. And so we check it on a monthly basis. And if there is a broken link, I update it on my website. That's all for free. People don't even have to get the book to get the website resources.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And, before we pressed record, I just want to say, I want to repeat to you that, and to our audience, my husband and I had the privilege of taking care of his dad with his dementia, and his mom as the primary caregiver for him as well. And both my husband and I said this morning, when I said we were chatting, how much this book would have helped us. Because there was times when we felt completely alone in it, even though we could see other people were experiencing the same thing.
Yes.
It's tough.
Yeah. And one of those universal feelings that I really feel people have when they're caregivers, and I'm only personally familiar with dementia caregiving, but it's very common for people to say they feel so alone and they sort of feel abandoned by the system. and by sometimes friends and family members. But mainly they just feel so alone. And that's what that's what I wanted to create, an assurance that you're not alone. There's a huge community of dementia caregivers in the U.S. alone. There's more than 12 million, sorry.
12
12
million
million
people.
of us, yes.
Yeah.
More than 7 million people with Alzheimer's dementia. The Alzheimer's Association keeps really good statistics on that. less common forms of dementia, causes of dementia are not calculated, but at least 7 million people with dementia. And that we're expecting by 2060 that number to double. New cases of dementia to double by 2060.
Really?
So that's really sobering.
My goodness, that is sobering. Do they know why, or?
Well, what's really interesting and ironic is that the incidence of dementia is going down. And that is because we have cleaned up our lifestyle quite a bit. No one would know it with the American diet, but we eat better, we exercise, we're more aware to stay socially active, and we're more aware to do cognitive exercises and try new things. And so the incidence has gone down. But the overall numbers have gone up because people are living longer. And age is one of the non-modifiable risk factors that we have. Genetics and age are two of the non-modifiable risk factors. So as we live longer, we have a greater risk of suffering from dementia.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. That's quite helpful. So we're talking about the caregivers feeling alone. Do you think it's because they're just so overwhelmed that they don't really have a bunch of time to look for resources, or like, how can we encourage our listeners, for example, some of which we know just from the stats, are caregivers?
Sure.
Where would you point them? Obviously the book and your links, but what would you say to them about getting involved in things that could help them?
Well, first of all, I think there's a realistic feeling. It comes from realism. Jason Karlowich, who is a neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote a book on Alzheimer's. And one of the things that he says is in his interviews is that when you say you have Alzheimer's, the world leaves you. And the world leaves your caregivers, because we're terrified. We're terrified of dementia. And we're more frightened of dementia than heart disease and cancer combined. People, that's their number one fear is dementia. And so there is a sense that people back away. And I had that experience with some people that I considered good friends. They sort of disappeared. And I was really astonished at that. Now, others came toward. And that's what I would say for listeners who aren't caregivers, but who are touched by dementia in that friends or family members are caring for somebody, is step forward. There are things that you can do. And you're not going to be asked to sit with somebody with advanced dementia and try to manage their behavior. But there's so many things that we can do to help others, so many little things. Like bring a meal, like do grocery shopping, anything like that. What I tell folks who are caregivers is to keep a list of small tasks, because there will be a bunch of people who say, let me know what I can do. And most of those people do mean that. I think there's some people who are like, let me know what I can do and get off the phone as quick as I can. But there are there's many people who really mean that, but they don't know what they can do. And if you have a list by the phone and you say, I was going to have to run out to the store for a gallon of milk and a dozen eggs this afternoon, it would be so helpful if you could do that for me. People are thrilled to do something that they know how to do, and it's small, but then it gives them a sense of, oh, I'm helping, and this is good, and I can chat for a minute if she wants to chat or he wants to chat, and this is good, and maybe I can do this again, and it builds on itself. We're also not good in the US in particular as a society that asks or accepts help. We really, as caregivers, think we're supposed to do it all by ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I would tell caregivers is get help early and often. I waited too long to get paid help. I did have my son and one of my stepdaughters were exceptionally helpful, and Walt was very comfortable with the two of them. They were exceptionally helpful, but I should have hired help earlier than I did because I felt like I should do it all by myself. Of course, he only wanted me, and that's common too, but we have to get over that and get help.
Yeah. And do you feel, it's because I remember looking at my husband's dad and just such an accomplished man in his life, and then watching him slowly kind of, things would fall off. He book club fell off, then the poker club and things that they could. And it's very private and emotional. So you could see why someone would definitely not want someone from the outside to come into their home. I can, as the person experiencing it.
Sure. It's not uncommon to feel embarrassed, like we've done something wrong to get dementia, and we don't want people to feel that way. But it is a taboo illness, because I mentioned that people are so scared of it. So yes, a lot of people are afraid to mention symptoms as they're starting to have them. My husband had an interesting different take on this. He was a brilliant environmental economist in the business school at the University of Alabama. And he started commenting early on, there's something wrong with my brain. And I practically snickered at him because nobody else saw it. Everybody thought he was he was consulting in Congress on greenhouse gases. He was traveling, he was doing all this stuff. But he recognized something. The other thing that he did that was so unusual and brave is early on, he found a fiduciary financial planner. And we went in. A fiduciary means that they're by law obligated to do everything in your best interest, not necessarily their financial best interest. And we went in there, and he said to these total strangers, I don't need help now, but I'm going to, because I've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I don't think I would have been that brave to do that. No. But it's exactly what we needed to do, to develop a multi-year relationship with a group of people who had our best interest in mind. And that has worked out brilliantly for me. I still have a great relationship with them and still get consultation of all kinds with them.
That's such good advice. And as you said, so incredibly brave for him to do that. Let's talk about caregivers for a minute. What are the most common ways that you see caregivers inadvertently neglect their own emotional or physical needs? And how do you talk to them about that in your writing?
Yeah. So we have a lot of guilt as caregivers because we're all imperfect humans and we are not going to do everything perfectly, but we have this standard set up for ourselves. First of all, we say, I should be able to do this. I can do it alone. I shouldn't need help. And when we set that standard for ourselves, we are setting up on unrealistic expectations. Whenever you have unrealistic expectations of yourself, what you're going to do in the service of those unrealistic expectations is you're going to neglect your own needs. They come second, if at all. So I'm just going to do everything, but I'm supposed to have a mammogram this year, but I'm going to skip that. No, that is ancillary. I don't feel great, but of course I don't feel great. I'm tired because of all of this. I'm not going to get it checked out. And so we start neglecting our own doctor's appointments and our own preventative care. That's often something that goes more quickly than other things. We're also called upon, especially in the later stages of dementia, when sleep is often impacted for a loved one. We're getting less sleep, and that really impacts how we're able to cope. And of course, we know now that sleep is a really important protective factor against dementia. And so the more we can protect our own sleep, the better off we're going to be in the long run too. Now, someone told me early on, and this was at a professional talk, and the person was well credentialed, and I thought she knew what she was talking about, but she shocked me so much because she said, research shows that caregivers die first. And I went, whoa. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Oh, no. Well, I'm a researcher. And I went back and I looked at the research, and that is not what the research shows. The research shows if you and I are both 65 and we're both taking care of somebody with dementia, if you're totally stressed out and I'm doing okay in terms of my stress level, yes, you're more likely to die earlier than I am. But that is totally different from saying caregivers die first. And that really did damage to me because I was fearful, and it wasn't motivating either to say, you're going to die first, so you better take care of yourself or you're going to die first. That's not the way we motivate people to take care of themselves, through fear. It doesn't work. We know that from psychological research. So what I say is it going to tax you? Absolutely. Is it going to physically and emotionally? Absolutely. Which is why we also need to build a team around us. So as you're making that list of little tasks and the people who are helping, you're bringing in a team. And the team effort, I think, is what keeps us more likely to engage in self-care and to get our own needs met as well. Because it's not just about taking care of yourself as a caregiver so that you can care for your loved one. It's that you yourself are worth taking care of just because you are you. And so I stress that in the book as well. I think that's so important.
I completely agree. And you do speak so eloquently about the emotional weight of caregiving. Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. Can you share a story from your own journey that illustrates kind of the heartbreak but again, the deep reward that you get in a caregiving role?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I opened the book with was an introductory, sort of chapter, the initial thing. And it was it was recounting Thanksgiving Day shortly before Walt actually passed away. He was still upright. He was still eating and drinking, but he had forgotten how to use utensils, and he was starting to forget how to put food into his mouth. And those stages are so heartbreaking because all through the progression of dementia, we are grieving the loss of a newly dissolved skill that they had. And so I opened the book with that anecdote, not to frighten anybody, but to talk about how toward the end of dementia, toward the end stage, and he didn't even make it to the last stage of dementia, but toward the end of dementia, there's so much going on that seems bizarre, and you just don't really even know how to contain it, and you can't contain it. And what I learned is that we had to surrender. I had to surrender. I had to accept he is getting worse, and there is nothing I can do to change that. And I am going to be his companion through this, and he is going to die, and I'm going to try to help him die in the most gentle, peaceful way possible, if I have any control over that. And I think we do if we do planning early on with dementia and other illnesses. For example, we had in his living will, do not take me to the hospital. And luckily, his primary care doctor honored that. She also did house calls, if you can believe that in this day and age.
Oh, wow.
And she said, when she saw our living will, she said, the way this is written, we don't want to go to the hospital because that's where you get hooked up to the machines and all that. And he doesn't want any of that. She said, we'll treat it at home. And toward the end, this was during COVID. And I got COVID early on, long before the vaccines were available. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if he gets COVID? Or if I have to go to the hospital, what's going to happen? And I called her and she said, if he gets COVID, we're treating him at home. And because it would kill him way quicker to be dropped off at the emergency room and be strapped to a gurney and die there by himself, kill him way quicker. So we had some things in place that I think people, they don't want to think about the end of life and they don't want to think about what their end of life wishes are, but it's so important to do that before somebody loses their ability to make their own medical decisions. And it doesn't happen all at once. And there is time to do that. But it takes bravery. And we were both brave in that regard.
That and I think it's something that I think we're getting better at it, but in terms of health directives and stuff, that should be when someone gets a diagnosis, that should be one of the first conversations that a team of caregivers can present to them.
That's right.
Let's talk about things that are going to come up down the road, and now when you can express, this is how I want this to go. Right.
And let's talk about what the road is going to look like, because a lot of people are, they're of course, we're not going to know about dementia unless we're personally touched by it in some way. And let's talk about what that road might look like. Every person is different with dementia, but there are stages of dementia, so you can have a roadmap. You can have a roadmap of what's going on and what's going to happen if something else doesn't take their lives earlier. And to know that ahead of time and to plan for that is so very important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your book offers tools about setting boundaries. Can you speak to our audience about boundaries and when you're caring with someone with dementia?
I think it's very important for caregivers to understand that, as a therapist put it to me, we're meant to give a pint of blood to this person, that person, whatever. We're not meant to bleed out for another person. And so I think in my mind, a pint of blood, not the whole thing, not the whole thing. And to be able to say, oh, this was something else I read. Once a person is diagnosed with dementia, they are 100% forgiven for everything. And I understand where that was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is, I think it makes the caregiver feel like, I just got to take it. I just got to take it. And if there is, if somebody is combative, not because they're a bad person, but because their brain is disintegrating and they have dementia, if they're combative, that does not mean you have to subject yourself to being hit just because they have dementia. It may mean that they need placement elsewhere, a different living arrangement, and or it may mean that you need to bring professional help in, or it may mean that it's time for hospice and palliative care. At the very end of Walt's life, he was hallucinating and he was very, very agitated. And for some reason, we had moved everything downstairs. He was already in the hospice in-house. He was very, very agitated, and he wanted to go upstairs. And he was fighting me and Katie, my stepdaughter, to get up those stairs. And it was clear that one of us was going to get hurt. One of us was going to go down those stairs. So I actually called my primary care doc with a mayday. And she said, this can't go on like this. And he didn't want to go to the hospital, and I understand that, but we're going to have to sedate him because he's going to get hurt and he's going to hurt you. And she was able to sedate him at the very end of his life. And did that hasten his death? It may have a bit, but by that point, he was really suffering, and so were we. And it was getting physically dangerous. So to set those boundaries and to have people help you set those boundaries. The other thing he did, he had this really very detailed living will with a dementia addendum. I have that for my own self, and I also have it copied in the book for people. He had this very detailed living will, and certainly do not resuscitate if my heart stops, but it was much more than that. At some point, pretty late in the game, he said to me, maybe I should reverse that thing where they let you die. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, if my heart stops, maybe I should let them do that. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, I'm scared. I'm scared to die, and therefore I'm scared of everything. He didn't say it quite that eloquently, but he was scared.
Yeah.
But he had lost his ability to reason by that time. But I thought, I've got to honor his wishes. And it was our primary care doctor who said, I really encourage you to honor his living will that he's had for years. And while he was in his right mind, as she said, these were his values and this is what he wanted. His now self, he really cannot reason. He doesn't have the capacity to understand what he's asking for. Doesn't have the capacity to understand that may mean years in a nursing home where he doesn't recognize anybody. And he had been very specific. When I don't want to get to the point where I don't recognize myself as self, or when I don't recognize my children and you. And he was just moving into that point when he had to be sedated. Mm-hmm. So we're lucky in that regard. But if we had let him go to the hospital or put him in a nursing home, he could have easily survived another several years not knowing anybody. And he told us that's the one thing he didn't want.
Mm. I mean, I have to say, your primary care physician sounds like a gem who should be teaching master classes
Yeah.
for
She's a
caring.
goddess. Yes, she's a goddess, and she was associated with the university. She is retired now, and we're all very sad about that because so many of us, this is who I want toward the end of life. Yeah, she was terrific. She's helped so many people at the end of life.
Mhm.
She was the one who told me it was time for hospice, and I was just astounded. I said, "Oh no, it's way too early." And she said, "I see this every day. I can pretty much call it." And she was right. She was absolutely right.
Wow. Um, so you draw on your therapeutic techniques when you're talking to your readers about processing grief,
Mm-hmm.
like leading up to and
Mm-hmm.
after a loved one's passing. Um, I remember having a conversation with my mother-in-law leading up to my father-in-law's passing, and we talked about it as the long goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just because it was stages, and as your husband was such an accomplished individual, and grief really starts well before the actual passing of your loved one. So, what exercises or practices have you found are best for fostering healing? I know you mentioned journaling at the beginning of our chat.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk to our listeners a little bit about that, because I do work with the bereaved as well, and I would love your insight on this.
Right. So journaling, I think, is a very useful technique because we're getting our emotions, our thoughts, and our emotions out on paper, not to share it with anybody, but to get them out. And we feel guilty about some of our emotions. Like, let's say a loved one dies and we feel relief. Oh, we also feel guilt about feeling relief. To be able to write that all down and get it out on paper, it's called emotional expression, and it has been shown to be very, very therapeutic. The other thing that I teach and have taught for years is relaxation and meditation exercises to be able to just breathe and focus on one's breath. And I also have audios of myself leading with meditation and relaxation exercises on my website that anybody can access for free. And I think those are very important. And you know what? It's really interesting for people with dementia. They can listen along, they can breathe, they can be aware of their breath going in and out. And when we do that, it actually calms our nervous system down. When we're all jazzed up and hepped up, and oh my gosh, that's our sympathetic nervous system engaging what we call fight or flight. And when we're able to quiet that down with breathing exercises and relaxation exercises and meditation, and it engages the parasympathetic nervous system, and it just calms the entire body and the mind down. So that's another technique that I use a lot. I use with my folks with chronic pain, and we're using it with people with dementia and their caregivers for sure. Yeah,
That's excellent.
exercise, physical activity
Exercise.
is
Yeah.
another very useful and important coping technique. And people don't think about that, but just getting up and stretching, even if you cannot get outside, walking around the apartment or walking around the inside of the house can be very, very useful. Just getting moving a little bit. Yeah. So those are a few.
No, those are great. What about community support groups, whether it be for bereavement or caregiving groups?
Right. Right. I think those are so important. Uh, Community support of every kind what's interesting now is that we're seeing crop up more uh, uh, daycare kinds of respite programs for people with dementia, specifically to give caregivers a break. And so, for example, we have 2 in Tuscaloosa. Well, we actually have 3. One's just starting in Tuscaloosa, which isn't a big city, but it is a big university town. But and sometimes there's a fee associated with them. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes they're faith-based. Sometimes they're not. But what's happening here is we can take our loved one to that activity center for a few hours a day, and we can do what we need to do to take care of ourselves and also to manage the household. One of the just the best things that the executive director of one of these care facilities told me when I visited, because I was feeling guilty that I would actually consider taking him for daycare. Why shouldn't I do it? And so I sort of skulked in there, and he said, listen, I'm open today, the day after Christmas, because our clients benefit from a schedule and they like to be with each other. And you, I'm open for because you have a household to run. And he didn't say to me, because you're going to die if you don't take care of yourself or any of that. It was just very matter of fact. And it was so liberating for me. We still have households to run. And to know that our loved ones are in a daycare kind of arrangement. I have a friend in Phoenix, and her husband has dementia. And their daycare facility calls themselves the club. And he loves to go to the club. He just adores it. And I love that name, too. It's not like daycare facility. It's like the club. He loves it. And it gives her a break. She's still working, and she needs to work. And so this is a huge help for her. And it's a day-long situation. So that kind of care community. There are other care communities that aren't as systematic, like a daycare community where people with dementia come. But that's why I say to gather your team and to hold them close, not to over ask, but to say, will you be part of my support team during this trek? And I'm not going to over ask, and I'm not going to ask too much of you, but I need support. I need to know that I'm not alone. And that's huge. Just to ask, to continue to ask, and to ask in what I call a stand tall or an assertive way, rather than a guilt-inducing way, or rather than an angry way, like, you haven't shown that you love me. That's not going to help. That's going to make us other people defensive. So the ask is also very, very important. And I encourage caregivers to continue to ask. They will be so surprised at some of the people that come through that they didn't even consider more than an acquaintance. And they're joining the team, man. And they're a godsend.
That's beautiful. I know here in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a care center for a day program. It's called the Ivy. And the bus goes around to all of the retirement homes and picks people up all over the city. And they have a beautiful music program. They go on outings. They go to shows. It's fantastic. And it gives, like you said, it gives the person who's attending the program some cognitive stimulation and socialization. But it also gives the caregiver just a little reprieve to do what they need to do for themselves.
And when we pick our loved one up and they're happy and satisfied, it's so gratifying. We feel so much relief. And sometimes they don't want to go. And Walt certainly didn't want to go to begin with. And oddly, when he finally relented and said he would go, they closed down for COVID. So he actually didn't get into the daycare facility. but he was ready to go. And a lot of people don't want to go to begin with because they think, oh, this, I don't want to be known as somebody with dementia. And then they go and they quickly get into it and usually love it. Yeah.
And things like music and movement, like I've read some things about just how helpful that is in terms of someone's cognitive kind of balance, but also their mood and anxiety. Like all those things play a part, right?
Absolutely. And music, depending on the music, I wouldn't suggest heavy metal, but music has a very calming influence. And what's very interesting to me is sometimes people who are no longer verbal can still sing. One of Walt's uncles, paternal uncles, had Alzheimer's way back when we didn't even really know what Alzheimer's was. And he was totally nonverbal, but he could sing beautifully to the day he died. Different part of the brain.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting. And that gave him so much pleasure. And it gave his caregivers pleasure and relief to see that he could engage in something like that. Is beautiful. Music is always a part of these daycare programs for that very reason. And physical activity, fun physical activities are as well. Simple physical activities,
Right.
but fun, simple group physical activities are as well.
Yeah. I've always thought, and I'd love to get your thought on this, when my husband's dad was advancing, and so he was moving towards that nonverbal phase. He was a singer as well. He sang in college, and so he loved singing the old songs. I loved singing with him. But, but one of the things that fascinated me, and I always held on to it for a very specific reason. My brother-in-law came to visit, and we had dinner together with Brady's parents. And my brother-in-law is an engineer, and so is Brady's dad. He had a conversation about engineering with my brother-in-law that he didn't skip a beat. And after dinner, my brother-in-law looked at me and he said, he doesn't have dementia.
Right.
And,
So sure.
right. And I think like one of the things that I always keep that in mind when I meet someone whose partner has dementia or something, because there's a part of this brain that we don't understand, right? And there's little things that are locked away that someone turns the right key.
Yes. It's so interesting that you mentioned that. So my husband was an economist, so he was a math guy. But pretty early on, he first started having problems with language and then reading and then math. And he couldn't multiply 5 by 7. But he could sit at the kitchen table with my adolescent son and discuss calculus theory, but he couldn't multiply 5 by 7. And I was just astounded at that. First of all, it's a different part of the brain.
Yeah.
And second of all, what we have used for such a long period of time in our avocations or our vocations, that part of the brain got used very well. And so it's probably fatter, that part of the brain, and a little bit less, the impact on that part of the brain is going to be less for a long time. Eventually it'll catch up with the person. But yeah, that's so interesting because different parts of the brain serve different functions, and the brain is dying slowly, but it depends on which part of the brain that's dying first, what kind of symptoms you're going to have. And we're now learning so much more through research. I cannot overemphasize the importance of continuing the research that we've begun. We are learning so much about that the brain is very plastic and very resilient. We now know that the brain can make new cells. When I went to graduate school, we were told that the brain couldn't make new cells. But now we know that the brain can make new cells, and it's much more plastic than we ever thought it was. And that's probably the reason why you could have a disease like Alzheimer's disease for 10 or 20 years and not know it because you don't have symptoms. Because your brain is accommodating. It's got a disease, but it's got a lot of workarounds, hopefully, and it's accommodating. At some point, there's a tipping point. At some point, there's a tip, and that's when we start to have symptoms. I believe that we are about to find out what that tipping point is in research. And that's one of many reasons why it's so important to continue with that kind of research.
Yeah, we definitely can't take our foot off the gas with that.
No.
It's too important.
Yes.
Before we finish up this fascinating conversation, and I would love to have you back to talk more about this sometime in the future, because I just think it's so important, and it's kind of a topic where we all face it from one moment or another, right? It's part of our journey, and the more that we can educate ourselves and each other, and let caregivers like yourself know that you're not alone, I think is so important.
Yes.
So for our listeners who are preparing to step into a caregiving role for the first time, what would be 3 pieces of advice you would offer them for their own well-being alongside their loved one?
Great question. So I would say the thing that comes to mind, and I talk about quite a bit at first, is because you're going to want to go, no, oh no, okay, well, we'll just wait on this, is to learn about it, to be in the know. And I did not want to learn about dementia. In fact, I complained. I said, I don't want to get another PhD in dementia. I didn't want to learn about it, but it was so empowering to me to understand what we were dealing with and to understand the trajectory that we were likely going to go on. That was very empowering to me. It was very realistic to understand, to have conversations with your loved one, with your healthcare providers, with trusted family members and friends. You don't have to put an announcement in the paper, but to have those conversations and have conversations with your loved one to start clarifying your life values, what makes life worth living, and your bottom lines. What doesn't make life worth living? To clarify end of life values, to document all of that information for yourself and for your loved one while they can still make these decisions. And they have unless they're diagnosed late in the game, they have the capacity to have those conversations. They may be sparing you the conversations, you the caregiver, because they don't want to trouble you. My husband said to me when we first got the diagnosis, he said, "I'm sorry, babe, you didn't sign up for this." And I said, "Nobody signs up for this." You would do the same for me. You would help me, and he would have been much better caregiver than I was, I think. But nobody signs up for it. But to learn about it, to be in the know, to have the conversations that we all want to avoid, and to do that planning ahead of time and to document it. So important, so empowering, and it makes the whole journey so much easier. And you won't know it until the end, and then you'll go, oh my goodness, thank goodness that I had that written down. Thank goodness that we talked about this. I talked to a lot of people who say we never talked about this. I don't know what they would have wanted.
Well, and when they get to that point, then you as a caregiver, if you don't know what your loved one want to do the right thing, and it's just emotionally, it must just shred that person,
No,
you know? Yeah,
it'll complicate your grief much worse if
right.
you make a decision that you didn't know whether they wanted that or not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Finally, how can our audience continue their conversation with you? I know there's going to be some people who are going to listen to this and are going to want to learn more about, your website, coaching, your book. So just if you could tell our audience how they can find you.
Sure. So I would direct people to my website first and foremost, and it's drbeverlythorn.com, and it's no E on the end of Thorn. Everybody thinks there's an E, but it's like the rose, drbeverlythorn.com. And I'll show you a copy of the book.
It's beautiful, actually. I love the cover so
I
much.
love this book. I love the cover, and there's a story of the cover too. But anyway, a dear friend of mine took that photograph.
Oh,
But
really?
this is available on Barnes and Noble. This is available on Amazon. If you have a favorite local bookstore, if you ask them to order it, they will order it for you. And all that ordering information is also on my website. So I encourage people to start with the website.
Okay, so I will, and all of your contact information will be in the show notes as well. So when the
Oh, good.
episode goes live, all of the links will be right there, so that listeners can just click on it and connect with you.
And in terms of follow-up, there is a little contact icon that you can message me, and people do message me all the time. And I don't practice clinically anymore, but I give advice and help people think through stuff, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to give back. It makes me feel better, and I'm really gratified by how many people I've met through writing this book.
Well, this book is definitely needed, and I know will impact so many who find it. Beverly, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I so appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you so much. It was a
It was
pleasure.
great to chat. Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.